Flat burr coffee grinders tend to get a lot of the glory, and they sit on top of the wish lists for many baristas, but conicals shouldn't be counted out. And one conical that's recently caught my eye is the new Varia VS3. Of course, on paper, it's a lot like many of the other grinders that have hit the market over the last few years, built on the increasingly common but successful platform of single dosing and low retention. But its compact, modern and minimalist design, full metal construction and affordable price tag makes it a bit of a standout in today's market. So in this video, I'll be digging into the VS3, its notable features, performance, and downsides, all while seeing how it lives up to the expectations a market full of similar grinders has created. And as always, in the spirit of full disclosure, when I reached out to Varia to ask for a loaner unit to review, they were kind enough to offer me one to keep without any strings, constraints, or agreements. With all that out of the way, let's dive into it. Like a lot of grinders, the VS3 can be more or less understood at a glance, but underneath its simple form are some features worth highlighting. Starting with the body, which is entirely made of metal, from the hopper cap all the way down to the dosing cup. Honestly, it's surprisingly heavy while also being very compact, and it can easily be held in just one hand. And of course, don't get it twisted, but this baby is tilted, 76.5 degrees to be specific, which Varia says allows for zero retention conditions, but we'll get more into that soon. Up on top, the grinder's hopper serves a dual purpose. Not only is it where your beans are staged prior to grinding, but also as the adjustment knob. The movements themselves are very smooth, effortless, and maybe most importantly, stepless. Each of the markings or increments on the hopper are 20 microns, which gives you precision adjustments and the freedom to grind for whatever your preferred method or methods are. Doing the grinding is their in-house designed 6-core conical stainless steel Supernova burr set. And that may be a mouthful, but the burrs themselves are a relatively small 38mm and spin at a modest 160 RPM. But with a max batch at or around 30 grams, it means the grinding itself doesn't take too long. But that's what I would call a perfect segue into the next section. So now that we've covered all the notable features, let's get into what really matters, and that's how these features actually function as a coffee grinder. And I think the best place to start is where we left off in the last section, and that is with grind speed. The amount of time it takes to run through a batch, much like other grinders, depends on your grind size, with finer applications like espresso taking roughly 40 to 45 seconds on a 17-gram dose, and 30 to 35 seconds on filter settings with a 20-gram dose. And personally, I usually run the grinder for a few seconds after all the beans have come through to push out any retained grinds still in the chamber. Speaking of retained grinds, and as I even mentioned earlier, one of the main selling points of the VS3 is its zero retention focus, which comes with a stated retention number of less than 0.01 grams per 10-gram dose. And through my testing on both filter and espresso, I can say that this has actually been the case, with my scale showing the same weight in and the same weight out. The grind's texture and particle distribution is pretty typical to what you'd expect from conical burrs, providing a decent variation which brings with it its unique cup qualities. When it comes to espresso, the shots themselves have a full body and a nice mild clarity, plus a little more acidity than your average conicals, especially in those traditional shorter ratio pulls. When it comes to brewing filter coffee, much like the espresso, it's full-bodied and balanced, and the available clarity seems to bump up a little bit, allowing for some additional nuance. Of course, taste is always and forever on top, but in the spirit of completionism, the extraction numbers are well within the specialty standard range of 18 to 22% out of the box, regardless of your brew method. And lastly, getting into the burrs for cleaning is as simple as spinning the adjustment ring all the way coarse. And also, it comes with tools and extras for the small parts should the need arise. Even the simplest of tools have quirks and downsides, and the VS3 has a few that stood out to me through my testing. The biggest issue concerns the adjustment dial, which, as I mentioned before, doubles as the hopper. Over the course of a handful of batches, I couldn't help but notice that there was a decent amount of travel in the adjustment knob. On its face, it's not a massive change, but considering each notch is 20 microns, it doesn't take long to scoot right past your dial in. Now in most cases this isn't something that's going to be too detrimental after a batch or two, but it's best to be aware of that movement and make corrections frequently to keep things in line, especially when it comes to espresso. Also, I've got to mention the bellows, which you may have noticed has been conspicuously missing from the video thus far, and there are a couple good reasons for that. For one, next to the grinder, its dosing cup, and even the small glass RDT spray bottle, the The bellows just feels cheap and flimsy. When it's fitted to the grinder, it looks like it was more or less an afterthought. It just seems like something they felt it had to have, but considering the VS3's performance without it, it just doesn't seem necessary. And resting the nicely machined magnetic cap on it just seems sort of awkward, and a waste of such a pleasing part of the grinder. And lastly, because the VS3 is so compact, there are a couple small things worth noting. Since there isn't a whole lot of space for sound dampening, it does make some noise. It's not incredibly loud, but it does have sort of a higher pitched whine. And also, due to its lack of internal space, it does have a power box attached to its cord, which based on some comments from my LEGO mini review can be seen as a bad thing to some folks, so I figured I'd mention it. Personally, I have an undeniable soft spot for quirky little conical grinders, and the Varia VS3 absolutely hits it. Overall, its beauty is in its simplicity. From its clean and intuitive design to the coffee it brews, the VS3 is simply just a nice addition to your bar, either as a primary or a secondary option. But I will say, due to the nature of conical burrs and the grinds they produce, I tend to prefer it more for espresso than filter, although it's plenty capable as an all-around option. They also have some new burr options that seem even more espresso focused, so those could be a solid upgrade if you're an espresso boo like me, but I haven't tried them yet, so I can't personally say. In the end, I think the Varia VS3 clearly shows the difference between cheap and inexpensive. Very little about this grinder to me says cheap. A full metal body, steel dosing cup, a quality set of burrs, and even a thoughtful design delivering little to no retention. So it's not cheap, it's just inexpensive, but that does mean there's likely some corners cut somewhere in design and production to make it that way, just like any other piece of equipment. But it's not clear on the surface, so my main concern after all of this would purely be the motor's lifespan. And for $300, I don't think anyone is expecting perfection, but the grind adjustment travel stands out to me as the only usability issue that Varia should fix relatively quickly. But with all that said, I think it's time I wrap this one up and pass the conversation on to you. What are your thoughts on the Varia VS3? If you have one, what has your user experience been like? And if you're in the market for one or considering buying one, what other options are you weighing against it? Drop your answers to those questions and any others you may have in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see y'all next week. A big thank you to this month's Patreon supporters: Stephen, Claire, Sam, Bound Coffee, Spookus, Noel, Cheryl, Thomas, Sean, Horrison, Roe, John, Ads, Josh, Corey, Tim, Jason, Jeffrey, Jeff, Mike, Brian, Brandon, Tyler, JRC, Absolute, Stephen, Marco, Lord Bumbly, Arthur, TechCom Advisors, Happy Camper, Devo, Ben, Monster04, Bruce, Kyle, Lilac, NK, Brooks, Henry, Sam, Nano Roastery, Pat, Suin, Junior, Sergey, Matthew, Miroslav, Malkonig, Schlack, Shrey, Stephen, Andrew, Pedro, Rami, and Alex, and of course, a big thank you to the Barista and Barback tiers. If you want any information on my Patreon, there's a link in the description and the upper right-hand corner right now. And of course, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that little bell button for notifications of new videos posted every Friday. Check out my Instagram at Sprometheus for content throughout the week, my blog at Sprometheus.com, and as always, stay caffeinated. Bony boy.